Here we have a special bonus video discussion for this week. I was talking to the ever insightful Christopher Knowles about the Series 2 Stranger Things phenomenon. We can't even really call it that, because of how different it is to Series 1. And I was kind of discussing with him and him with me whether or not we'd even write about it, given that we did, have some good discussions about Series 1. And he, ever clever, hit upon quite a good idea, which is, why not, and this is great for me, why not gather a sort of TV Brains Trust, which is himself and Raj, both former guests of the podcast, and do this as a audio discussion instead. So that's what we've done, and that's what you can now listen to. So enjoy. Okay, so we will start with a lowball one. We're here talking Stranger Things 2. So both of you, welcome aboard. And was Stranger Things 2 any good?
Raj, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. All in all, I would have to say that I was kind of disappointed by it. There were individual scenes that I really, really enjoyed, but I think as a narrative for an entire season, it was lacking for me personally. I'd have to say, definitely. It was just there wasn't. I thought the storytelling was kind of flabby. There was not much narrative thrust or structure for me, and a lot of sort of tangents that didn't really seem to pay off. I'm not sure what Chris thinks though.
Yeah, I think Raj is being a little kind. I thought it was horrible. I thought it was like first draft writing at its worst. It just felt like they had to come up with some sort of story quickly as they could because they were on a schedule, and maybe Netflix was worrying about the long-term shelf life of the franchise and just wanted to strike while the iron was hot. I mean, it really, it's ironic because they tapping into the whole 80s genre idea. I mean, the interesting thing to me is that it felt more about movies of the 80s than it did of the actual 80s, the way, it had the texture and the feel of the 80s in the first series. So I just felt like they were just throwing everything they could into a blender. The writing, I just think, is unbelievably tired and weak. And like I said, it feels very first draft. And I just felt like it just totally fell flat. And then, of course, there's that 7th episode when they're trying to do like a superhero spinoff, like The Gifted or Legion or something like that. And it was just a disaster. It was one of the worst hours of television I've ever sat through.
Yeah. It was pretty grueling. It was pretty grueling.
This one, and this is kind of odd in a way, but it's not only worse than the first series, but if this was the first series, it wouldn't have been made. And my kind of abiding impression is that they got even less help, which is surprising. So they were, the Duffer Brothers in this case, were essentially left on their own. And one of the things I found kind of personally annoying being older than them with the first series was that they're like, we grew up watching these things. And I'm like, no, you didn't. You're younger than me. I was born in 81, so I got the late 80s. And this one is supposed to be an 80s pastiche that most of the motifs, or at least half of them, are 90s anyway, Jurassic Park and Aliens and so on.
Absolutely.
So they're not even getting that bit right. And that would be something that you go, if they were getting help with it, it's like they're just on their own, and I don't think they know what they're doing. I'm kind of maybe closer to, I think you were being a bit too nice, Raj. I think I'm a bit closer to Chris's analysis of it. I was just disappointed because there was some meat in series 1 that I think isn't there, with the one exception being Sean Astin was like the one light in the whole series. He did really well.
I totally agree with that. But if I could just say something really quick, is that, I mean, I think I'm pretty much with you guys, to be honest. But it's as a writer, I always try and kind of give artists the benefit of the doubt. So for me, season 1, I thought season 1 was quite derivative in places, even though I really enjoyed it. And I think the reason I enjoyed it was because the cast was so on point. The chemistry between the actors, you could just feel that it was kind of it was just a little bit more different, even though it was derivative, and I cared about the characters. So for me, the writing choices in season 2, for example, to keep 11 away from her little crew for the entire season. And I mean, she gets like about 15 minutes screen time with the rest of the kids. And so for her to go on this sort of like journey of self-discovery whilst building up all through season one, you know, the kind of the heart and the soul of the show is kind of how she interacts with Mike and Dustin and all the other kids, and you know, all their crazy adventures that they kind of solve as a group of friends, as a team. So it seemed strange that they would abandon that team aspect in season 2. So I think that's kind of what frustrated me in terms of the kind of like emotional arc of the series.
I think that the derivative nature of the first series, it all felt purposeful. It all felt like it was moving towards the general thrust of the series. The first series felt like it had a purpose. It was going somewhere. It had a destination. It knew what it wanted to say, and it knew how, you know, where it wanted to go and how it wanted to get there. I just feel like they had absolutely no idea what the story was going to be about. So they just cut and paste elements from all their favorite, you know, video store rentals, and it's just where those elements, you know, it's the difference between a collage and a pastiche. You know, a collage is made up of different elements, but it holds together, it hangs together as an image. You know, look at surrealist collage by somebody like Max Ernst or somebody. This just felt like pastiche. This felt like a kid in junior high school cutting and pasting, you know, the ads from the newspapers of his favorite movies into his notebook. It just there was nothing. It didn't have anything to say. I mean, it really didn't have anything to say. The first series felt like it had something to say about the time period that it existed in. And I really have to wonder, you know, how much of that is the Duffer Brothers and how much of that is, you know, the 15 other producers that were working on the first series.
Well, that's what I mean by it feels like they were left alone with this one. And the entire series is them brainstorming what series 3 can be, because they're on their own, because they're trying to do a sort of X-Files Sense8 thing, maybe, if that works with Eleven and her London sister, and maybe that'll work. And if not, it's like, well, let's look at the kids. And I think you're right, Raj, that there was a coherence around a kind of classic coming together of friends, Stand By Me in series 1, which isn't there except in the kind of walking along the train tracks visual cue
exactly.
that you get in it. And you go, well, this was kind of, in theory, even because we'll obviously come to the sort of limited hangout disclosures that is evident in series 1 and not in series 2. They're just on their own. And this is why I think, in a funny way, the hot mess that is series 2 further underlines the assertion that series 1 had a subtextual limited hangout goal that had nothing to do with the Duffer Brothers, because you leave them on their own and they give us this dog vomit instead.
Yeah, like, I mean, for example, Dustin, right? The character of Dustin, Gaten Mazzarato, I think the actor's name is. He's comedy gold, right? So you could see they're like, okay, let's give this kid a lot of cool lines. Let's have him kind of do some cool comic timing and maybe a bit of improv. But like in terms of his story, so he finds this little Demogorgon, calls it D'Artagnan, and then it doesn't really have much of a payoff except in the like finale where he's like, please don't kill us. And the Demogorgon's like, yeah, all right, cool. Even though he's just eaten a cat and is part of a hive mind. And I'm just thinking, like, what's the payoff here? And what's the narrative? Like, what's the reason for some of these writing choices? It just seemed strange to me, because the emotional beats of season 1 was definitely what hooked fans emotionally. Like, oh, okay, we relate to these kids. We like these kids. We want to see them succeed and bond, etc. But in season 2, there was none of that. Not that there just wasn't any kind of like, like telling tales out of school or anything sort of interest subtextually. Just the characters, they didn't really know what to do with the characters, and that just kind of annoys the shit out of me.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on that. The fact that the characters spend so much time talking about what happened during the last series was really a sign, I think, of creative desperation in some ways, that they had to keep dropping all this exposition about what had happened during the previous series and how they felt about it. And the other thing that they broke, a really central narrative rule to good cinematic storytelling, is that you show the way your characters being impacted by their emotions and their reactions to events. You don't have them talk about it. And we just got all these scenes where everybody's just sort of constantly talking about things that happened a year before. It just it seemed really strange. It's, kids are remarkably resilient, and they can experience trauma, and they can, it's not a topic. They're not still talking about it like it just happened, and that's what I feel. This doesn't feel like a year later. This feels like a week later at best. It feels like the next day almost, and. Totally. And it's an interesting thing with the timing is that, the Dustin character is really, he's the Corey Feldman character. I mean, the character, he's playing Corey Feldman, playing Dustin. If you watch Lost Boys or The Goonies or any of these films that Corey Feldman, played that same exact character in, and then to have the series drop in the middle of, Corey Feldman and Kevin Spacey and, have the whole Hollywood pedo issue come up, that all sort of ties back to the 80s. And then you have this whole issue with Stephen King and this weird orgy that he has in It. And, there's so many commonalities between It and Stranger Things. I mean, this series almost felt like, Goonies meets It, and that's all, with little tastes of other films, like the way David Harbour sort of morphed into Harrison Ford all of a sudden. So, I mean, it just seems like this series is not going to have anything near the staying power, the legs that the first series has. And I think that the timing here was like especially unfortunate. I mean, the stars were not aligned for this. I mean, just the way that all these, this whole Kevin Spacey thing's in the news constantly now, it just seems like really unfortunate timing.
It does. And I just think you kind of bring up a good point there. And structurally, they make every mistake that wouldn't get past a first draft. So going for, like, Aliens, a show has gone off the rails when it just says, well, one monster was scary, let's add infinite monsters. And that's the Aliens mistake. It's wrong. And I don't think they know what they're trying to do. So they messed up the emotional heart. They obviously were floundering around for a villain and just said, well, one was scary, let's do lots of them. But also the point, like, they're that devoid of ideas in series 2 that they have the sort of Ewan Cameron stand-in. He's still in it, just as like a ghost or a memory. Like, they can't even get what the point of the show is, and it's just I'm trying in my head to piece together what I think is going on, because I think there was a secondary or limited hang-up purpose to Series 1, and I'm trying to understand why it doesn't smell like there's one in Series 2, unless you think there is. So, Chris and Raj, is there is there more going on than meets the eye in this mess of a program?
Well, for me, I think that the whole the conspiracy guy character that some of the characters go to, the kind of comedy character who says, yeah, let's water it down. I think that's the whole show in a nutshell. It's a kind of watered down. It's kind of like giving it kind of shortchanges the any kind of inherent power from the first season. It's like, okay, we set up this bad guy, we set up the Department of Energy, we set up all these things, and then we kind of just go, oh, don't worry about it. The main doctor guy, he's totally cool. He's a nice guy. And oh yeah, what was the line? They're all gone now, so no need to worry about them. No need to explore that much. I'm sure that there is some kind of signaling going on. I'm just not entirely sure.
That was the only bit that I could see that was where he essentially does a piece to camera, the sort of classic conspiracy guy, which says, if you want to talk about this stuff, you have to do a smaller version of it. And it's obviously talking about the missing kid from the last one. It's like, he just turns the camera and says, no one's going to believe any of this. You have to do a smaller version. And that's the only thing I can see that smells kind of as as in your face as a lot of the stuff in series 1. But Christopher, what are your thoughts?
Well, that whole sequence with this character who just sort of pops up. I mean, he's introduced, briefly in a couple different episodes before we have that really strange and almost entirely extraneous scene with him at his little compound, which, it just seemed like a little lone gunman to me. But it feels to me like, and this might be, this is obviously entirely conjectural, but it might just be off the rails here, but it almost feels to me like they got to talk. Like they said, somebody sat them down and said, okay, this is a franchise now. This is a property. You can't talk about that stuff anymore. You can't talk about mind control and MK Ultra and all these things in a property. I mean, it's okay if it's a little boutique series, but this is something that's going wide. This is something that's going to the Targets and the Walmarts and the shopping malls. This is not going to work. We're not going to allow this. It's just, and if I was going to give the Duffer Brothers any credit, I would, imagine that they had sort of the legs taken out from underneath them and had to just scramble and come up with this half-assed, hand-me-down pastiche storyline. And it's interesting that you mentioned, aliens, because in this case, the stakes are so low. At the same time, you have it apparently seems that the stakes are much higher. Like the Upside Down has invaded our realm, and it's nesting and growing and things like that. I mean, it just seems like the stakes are so much higher than what everyone else was facing, which was just a lost boy. So I think that I'm going to give them maybe a little bit more credit than they deserve, and say it feels to me like they were, the kibosh was put on any sort of, even in a limited hangout sense, any sort of, telling tales out of school, any sort of revelations, and they just had to offer a product, and maybe that's why it's so weak and so tired, because the hearts weren't in it.
Yeah. I think Chris has got a point, but I also think that. I wouldn't be surprised if someone did give them that talk. But also, whatever story advisors or consultants that they might have had on season 1 clearly weren't there for season 2, because even if someone had said to them, okay, this can't be too politicized, it can't be spiky and edgy and interesting like in the way that many of the elements of season 1 were, but you could still have crafted a really sort of emotional, interesting, engaging story instead of this kind of unwieldy mess that we got.
See,
I mean,
100%. Yeah. They may well have got the talk. For me, it doesn't smell like. From an Occam's razor perspective, and we're about to talk about what I think, or what we all think, obviously, was the point of series 1. And I just wonder if, in that Netflix sense where you're never sure if you're going to get another series, if the messaging goal, and I'm about to ask you what you think it is, for series 1 was achieved, and so they've just been left alone in a funny way, like, well, your reward is now that you are celebrated TV makers, so go and make some celebrated TV, and they can't do it because they were cutouts used to deliver a very specific message, which I would argue is brand repositioning around the whole idea of deep state child abduction, which I think was, we'll talk about it. I think there's a kind of, as I'm sure you both agree, there is something going on over the last 3 or 4 years of television that involves repositioning the deep state, for want of a better word, or these kind of nefarious programs as being for our benefit. And none of that is there, because there's the menace. The whole fear of the first one was about a missing kid, as Chris said, but it's a missing kid and it's government projects to do with stealing children and all that kind of stuff, right? In this one, there's none of that. There's no tale being told out of school. It's just like afterwards, and it just for me, the hypothesis, maybe they got the talking to, or maybe Stranger Things 1 did what it needed to do, and now we're just in the afterbirth.
But yet, like, poor Will still has to suffer incredibly in season 2. Like, yeah, like the whole deep state stuff seems to be completely missing. You know, the Doctor's a good guy. The government seems sort of like quite like cheerful blokes, but they kind of give the sort of really sort of weird trauma stuff to Joyce. Like, oh, okay, this is the mother of this kid, and she loves this kid so much that she's going to like strap him down and put bright lights in his face and burn him and do all these things. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, hasn't this poor kid suffered enough in season 1? I mean, he was in another fucking dimension. Like, can you come up with a more interesting or a more elegant way to kind of like?
But I don't think they can. I followed on Winona Ryder's trauma more in series 1, and the horror of that experience. In series 2, it just seemed it seemed gratuitous and, frankly, a little bit too sexy for prepubescent children.
Yeah, and it reminded me of the whole that whole Panic at the Disco video, which was basically the same deal with, wasn't it the same actor?
It was the same actor, yeah.
So that kind of, I was just thinking something feels wrong here, but they kind of lost me in terms of just storytelling, because I was like, you know what, I don't really care.
I actually didn't care if Will was going to live or die at that point, because I found him really whiny. I found the kind of weird love triangle going on with his best friend and 11 tiresome. Like, at that point, I think I would have, if I could have helped the Upside Down emerge and destroy the town, I would have.
It's funny though, getting back to the whole idea of the timing and, these sort of issues with, what you refer to, that love triangle. And then there's this character, Billy, who seems like the stock depraved bisexual character, and he's flirting with, a mother, and he's given like Steve the eye and the orange shower and everything. There is like a little bit of that. Whoa. Hello?
Oh.
Hello?
Hello?
What was that?
That was a military aircraft. Carry on.
Okay. Oh, that's good timing.
Yeah.
So, the timing, and, the interesting thing, too, is that what they were really doing with Will is that they're doing The Exorcist.
Yes.
It was just, he was possessed, and it's not even subtle. It's not even, well rendered. And, just the fact that he's half naked all the time, it just seemed like just weird. So that again is that weird, strange timing thing. But getting back to your point about the limited hangout aspect of this, you could argue, one of the things I wrote about Stranger Things last summer is like, it's not even like a limited hangout. It almost seems like this sort of repositioning MK Ultra to fit into this whole superhero kid meme that we're seeing so much of. The kids are being separated from their parents and becoming superheroes, psychic superheroes. And it almost seems like, there's almost like a sinister undercurrent in that regard, that, we're seeing so much of this theme in different programs and franchises, and then the fact that they sort of folded that whole theme that we're seeing so much of into this unbelievably terrible 7th episode with these unbelievably terrible stock characters from like the worst, Menachem Golem films from the 80s. It's like worst drive-in trash you can possibly imagine. It was almost like, these exploitation films, like that are created to cash in on, like, I don't know, breakdancing or punk or something.
Even more removed. It's like a rich housewife in Beverly Hills hearing about street kids on the radio. It's so far removed from any kind of authenticity that it's a private school or public school for Raj, a private school performance of like, a play about street kids. It was so bad. I got a little bit of cancer.
And that Collie character, I mean, what is she? do people like? Do you exoticize a character by like they don't use contractions? You know what I'm saying? It's like is that it's total Chris Claremont X-Men from 1986. The whole thing with Caliban and these people in the sewers and Kitty Pryde and everything. I mean, that's exactly what that storyline was. And I really have to confess. I mean, I think that 11 characters horrible. I think the actress who plays her is really wooden and stiff. And I was almost kind of grateful that she just wasn't in the mix. And the way that when you talk about sort of just faintly creepy relationships, I mean, the way that she's living with Hopper, and they're bickering like an old married couple, and she's wearing her hair in this way that makes her look like she's 40 years old. I mean, it was just weird. It was just like too many like mixed signals, just conflicting and just feeling weird and off, and I really dislike that character, and it really bothers me that they gave her like an entire episode that just felt like the old Assignment Earth Gary 7 spin-off within the series feeling, and that's the kind of thing you do like when the series is about to end and the producers are trying to line up their next gig. You don't do that like while the series is hot.
And you don't do it at the 7th episode, like so close to the finale of the season. Like, you know what?
Yes.
You know what that episode to me felt like? It felt like a set for a music video, or more specifically, a fashion shoot. Like, the art direction, the kind of the faux, decayed industrial aesthetic of this warehouse that has all this electricity and lamps placed strategically around, and it just seemed like a weird fashion set for kids. And I'm like, no.
Such a missed opportunity too, because I thought, maybe I'll give it the first few episodes and it'll start to get to the kind of Tales Out of School meat. And I thought it was going to happen because there was intimations that there's a wider program involving other kids. And then Kali turns out to be from London. I thought, now we're talking. Because obviously when you are talking about the post-war or the Cold War and so on, you have Porton Down and all these other programs that were going on.
Tavistock.
Yeah, so you have, because that's actually it. It was an Anglo-American project. And I thought, now we're talking. This is what it's going to be about. But it wasn't, and it was such a cut-out. Like, her name's Kali. Like, it could not be more white. Yeah. It could not be more white. Yeah. This is what like white people who've never met a British Indian say, this must be what she's like. And God, it was cringeworthy.
Well, as a British Indian, like it was kind of annoying, and just I remember kind of like gritting my teeth as I'm watching it, thinking, oh dear.
Like it felt like it was written by people who have absolutely no experience with that culture or any of these people. It was such an opportunity that was just missed. Condescending. It was condescending. Yeah. It just felt like I really hate when these Hollywood writers they want to include like a non-white character into their all-white story, and they have to create a total stereotype that has no actual humanity. That character had no reality. She had no personality.
They don't know what else to write, I guess. I mean, as a mixed race kid growing up in London, I see that kind of shit all the time, and I'm so desensitized to it now that whenever I do see a black character or an Indian character or any kind of mixed race character that seems relatively three-dimensional, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Even if everything around that character is garbage, I'm still like, I'm grateful that this person feels vaguely human.
Well, she's from London, because I remember reading, maybe over a decade ago, I think it was on cracked.com, but it was a piece which is why there are so many magical black characters in Hollywood films. And it's because they're written by white people, and instead of learning the culture, you just make them magic. So you don't have to put the same kind of effort into authenticity of depiction. And I thought the London thing was going to be good, juicy, deep state stuff, but it's not. They just had to make her more exotic rather than turn her into a real person, because London, a British Indian with a slightly confusing London accent, is exotic enough for a Netflix show. And this is how you know they were left on their own, as far as I'm concerned, because we would have picked that up presumably, especially you, Raj, but we would have done the depiction better. But the British component of these programs that were being really heavily winked at and repositioned around in Series 1 is a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I was expecting that character's face to kind of slide up like in AI or something and reveal circuitry underneath. But that would have been pretty cool.
That would have actually made it better.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, getting back to the whole pastiche aspect of this, the thing that really, it really felt uncomfortable for me is, the way that they're obviously lifting so much from the Goonies. Now, I don't know how long it's been since you guys have watched the Goonies, but when you go back and watch that film, it is creepy as hell. I mean, it's disturbing, and not disturbing like, oh, it's like a scary adventure. It's like so obviously, a pedo wet dream. And the fact that they're pulling so many elements from that film into this, I'm just like thinking, do these guys have no sense of cultural context here? I mean, are they not aware of the Corey and Corey show, and Corey Haim dying of a drug overdose and the whole breakdown and everything like that? And, so if there is this kind of whitewashing that we're talking about here, I really feel that it's almost like they're, how do I put this even? They're like rehabilitating the Goonies by inference, by making the climax of the story so obviously there's aliens in there as well, but Aliens, the Cameron film, but just the way they frame this, it just seems like, do they have no context of the reputation of that movie? It's just very strange. And if you go back and watch the Goonies, I mean, it's really disturbing. It's really upsetting.
No, I haven't. To be fair, I haven't seen it in a long time. But let's turn that into a question then, because I think this kind of comes back to my point. Remember, because Chris and I, we spoke about what was going on with Series 1 as we were writing various posts on it when it was out, and kind of sharing interviews with the brothers around that time. And there wasn't an interview that came out with them, there weren't that many of them, that came out in Series 1, where it seemed obvious to me that reality occurred to them. To the point where, if we wanted to be more conspiratorial, I don't think this is the case, but their relationship to reality was as sort of diluted as like a mind control asset or current day Tom DeLonge. Like, they just didn't get reality. And I think those are the kind of perfect idiots you use for a cutout when you need something to say. And so maybe they don't. I mean, that's the question. Are they at all aware that it kind of got unnecessarily sexy with their prepubescent audience at multiple times in Series 2, or is that intentional, given, as you say, the timing? So what do you think, Raj?
I asked myself the same questions because, as I said earlier, it's like just the whole finale with Will having to just suffer horribly again and being strapped down like 11 and all this craziness. I'm like, to me, it was just incredibly off-putting, and I just thought, well, like, what does this serve? All right, you want to have Will possessed. There's a million ways you could do that in an original way that hasn't been done before. So is it that you don't care? You literally just don't care, so you're like, all right, we'll do The Exorcist, but with kids, whatever, fuck it. Or is there something else there? Like, I'm not sure if I can answer that question, but all I can say is that it was creepy, unsettling, and that kind of vibe that Chris mentions. It's like, yeah, I could see the fingerprints of that all over the show. And if it's intentional, that's fucked up. If it's just really bad laziness and writing, that's fucked up. Because the fans were throwing so much goodwill at this show, and even though I thought season 1 was derivative, I still wanted it to succeed. I was like, yeah, I enjoyed this season, and I want to see where these characters go, and I want to see what they can do with this. And it was funny because I said this to a friend of mine recently, and I told her, like, I didn't really enjoy the season, and she was so hurt by it, like I had betrayed her. Like, she was like, how can you say that? She had clearly really bonded with these characters, and that wasn't because of demogorgons and God knows what else. It was because, okay, here's a group of friends that kind of are portrayed semi-realistically, and she kind of emotionally bonded with them. That's the only reason she was...
Okay, that's interesting because I've had a similar experience, and it's kind of getting to what I think Chris is hinting at. I don't think that's why she's bonded with the characters. I think she's bonded with the characters because in the years since Series 1, you can't open the Metro, you can't turn on an entertainment program, you can barely go on Mashable or Twitter without seeing what these adorable kids got up to today. Or look at them, they're tweeting each other, and they're getting that kind of Game of Thrones kids treatment. And so I think they've been incorporated into kind of people's lives. So if there is an ulterior motive behind it, it is located around either the actors or them as children in your life, which suggests maybe it's part of a wider program. Now, let's throw two other ones in there. I forget currently because I didn't do any. We just sort of had this call. One of the showrunners on Star Trek Discovery is one of the men who got the plan to do an all-female Lost Boys shut down. So these two men were going to do an all-female Lost Boys out in 2020 or whatever it is. Was it Lost Boys? What am I thinking? No, Lord of the Flies. They wanted to do an all-female Lord of the Flies. Now, Lord of the Flies is already a pedo movie. And so you have people in prominent television now that are in projects that you kind of go, that's a bit weird. I'm sure there's nothing behind it. But there is something behind it. Look at what's going on in Hollywood news. So, I don't know. Chris, is there a widening it out from Stranger Things 2? Is something creepier going on? Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Oh, well.
Hello.
Right.
Yes. So it's interesting you should ask that, because in looking at the source material that they're drawing from, back in the 80s, nobody really had any sense that this was anything but like wholesome family entertainment. Nobody had any sense that there was anything, untoward about it. And it wasn't until like I watched... it was E.T. that I watched, and this was actually a number of years ago, and I think it was before, all this, Pizzagate and all the rest of it, certainly. But I remember watching it and just thinking, like, this is really creepy. This something just, like, off about this movie. There's something just, I don't know, it just feels wrong and just something off-putting about it. And I think in this regard, I mean, it's like, so we didn't think that way back in the 80s. We didn't see any of this that way. And it wasn't really until like the early 90s when, all these child stars who were such big deals in these 80s films start to crash and burn, Drew Barrymore and the Coreys and on and on and on. I mean, it just feels like you sort of, and that, I don't even think that really pierced the veil. You didn't really get a sense that something was wrong, and it's only been in the past few years that this has started to come out. And the thing that when I spoke to Greg on Higher Side Chats, I talked about how my worry about the normalization process with this topic, and it does, like what I told him is I said it doesn't start with, say the articles that we see in The Guardian or Salon or something, where it's like, oh, you should feel sorry for these people. It starts with like a controversy. And the way that, I think, Pizzagate, when you talk about Pizzagate being an op and such, I think that what it did is that it made people look like fanatics and maniacs and dangers. The people who, are up in arms about, organized pedophiles, it made them look crazy and dangerous. And it almost feels to me that like what Gordon was referring to in the film is, maybe you start throwing out some red meat to lure in the beasts. It's like
it's redrawing the Overton window. So post Pizzagate, people have had to make a decision whether it is acceptable or not to have paintings of children in their underwear hanging on a wall in your house. And people go, yeah, that's acceptable. I don't think he's a paedophile. And you go, and he might not be. But, as you say, it's a controversy thing. The Overton window keeps moving. And hopefully it's been shouted down because it's the stupidest idea possible. But an all-female Lord of the Flies, which was being pitched by the current Star Trek Discovery, one of the Star Trek Discovery showrunners, that would do the same thing. Because if you remember the last one, speaking of, I don't know when the last time you watched a film that is essentially prepubescent boys in their underwear wet half the time, you do that with prepubescent girls this time and you're going to have the same discussion. Oh, is this art? Is this inappropriate? And you just keep moving that window.
Yeah, well, and let me just, I just want to reiterate just one sec, Roger. It's like the way, like I said, I mean, Pizzagate was a gift. Pizzagate was like a gift wrapped present to the the pedophile lobby in some ways, because it made people who are upset and engaged and concerned about this issue look like assholes and idiots and dangers. I mean, it made them look dangerous. So it's like the controversy in the normalization process, it's sort of about managing perception and managing perceptions of danger. And with any issue that is raised in this regard, it's always about who seems more dangerous, which side seems more dangerous, and that's how people make their decisions. I mean, it's complete and total emotional manipulation, but that's the way it works. And again, this whole thing with this Lord of the Flies thing. I mean, it's like, who thinks this is a good idea? It's just bizarre.
There is no creative reason for it, and if there was a creative reason for it, it would be run by women. But it was pitched as a show. The screenplay was going to be written by two men, and it was going to be an all-female Lord of the Flies. That is an op. I don't know what it's about. It might be this Overton window pushing. But if it was about yay women, which is fine, it would have been written by women. But they aren't stupid enough to pitch an idea. The fallout on Twitter was hilarious because a female Lord of the Flies would have had no conflict. They would have worked together on the island until they were rescued. There's something going on. And I don't know if the Duffer Brothers, and this is where I give them the benefit of the doubt. I honestly think they're tone deaf. But maybe they're not. Maybe this is what that is. I just think they're tone deaf because I don't even think they understand their own childhood because they're remembering things that didn't happen to them.
Yeah. Roger, do you want to take that?
No, yeah, I was just thinking back to what Chris said about the whole gift-wrapped Pizzagate stuff. Like, for me, I kind of see this stuff as, like you said, like limited hangouts or cul-de-sacs, or it's like, it's sort of like trying to get in front of any potential risk, and it's kind of like it's kind of getting people to imbibe the newspeak and kind of self-censor themselves to like the point of madness, so that we're on this kind of like highly strung, super anxious internal state where we don't know what information to look at, we don't quite know what to say, we don't quite know what to think. It's like it's kind of like ushering in the era of like hyper high frequency anxiety about the state of politics, the state of power, the state of just the kind of interrelationships of power that we see all around us. And it's very intense and it's very strange, and I have no doubt that mass produced art and stuff coming out of Hollywood feeds into this kind of this general push in a variety of ways.
The one thing that I wanted to bring up, though, is it's kind of ironic in that this reminds me, Gordon, of our sort of discussion on Alien Covenant, that, it just seemed like there's such anticipation for this project, and then it becomes such a damn squib. And I really, like I said, I don't feel this project has legs. I wanted to do this discussion as close to the release date as we could, because I just don't feel like people are going to care next week. I think that it's going to, it's going to be over. People are going to have people are going to have this well of good feeling, this reservoir of good feeling towards these characters. I mean, these kids are really good actors and they have good chemistry, but I just think that people are just going to go, they might not necessarily speak it out loud. But, it's interesting what Raj was just saying about like the anxiety and stuff and, the way people respond when you tell people you don't like them. I mean, there is another interesting theme here, and that's the way that these franchises are sort of managed to be almost obligatory viewing. It's like if you don't like it, there's something wrong with you. If you don't watch it, then you're really there must be really something wrong with you. So I think in that regard, I mean, there are greater issues surrounding this, but I'm not exactly sure that the quality of this will feed into that and will sustain this. I mean, it could very well be that we won't see another Stranger Things for another couple of years because, you're sort of the tail of this, you're curating, and they have all these metrics for determining the effects of these things. I think it's going to really just fade from you. And the problem is with child actors. I mean, it's interesting, like our relationship to child actors, it almost has like a pedophilic aspect to it, in that we like these characters and these actors because of who they are when they're young. And just look at somebody like Haley Joel Osment. He's this little moppet in Sixth Sense and in AI. And I remember like when he was doing the promotion for AI, he hit puberty, and all of a sudden he looked like really kind of weird. It just like he didn't look like the same person. So it's like the deadly aspect of child stardom in this culture is the way that we prize these children for something that is entirely temporary and they have absolutely no control over. And I think it's like in the end, it's very destructive. It's like you can't keep these kids young. I think all these kids are going to enter like really weird and awkward adolescence very soon, and they just won't have the same appeal.
Yeah, you can see that.
I think that's a great insight.
The Harry Potter films, the last 3 or 4 of them, they look like they're made out of, it's like a plasticine version of the film. You go, you guys, it's not their fault. They all go through puberty, so their arms are too long, or they look horse-faced or something, because it's not an attractive time for anyone. And I think this comes back to the Overton window kind of idea is so alarming, because for most of history, there have been no protections for children. The reality is most of history has involved sexual predation on children. And there's been this kind of brief window of about 80 years of policy where you can't send kids down a mine, you can't have sex with them, and they've had 80 years of legal protection. And now what Raj was saying about there being anxiety over what to think or what to say, I think it's, in a way, it's the opposite. I think there's anxiety because you know what you're supposed to say, like the official kind of guardian position would be that hanging art and Tony Podesta may not be, dodgy, but hanging art like his kind of, semi-naked children now doesn't make you a pedophile. Now I have to go into someone's house and see that and go, that's fine. That is fine now. And I don't think it is.
No, but you're only telling half the story, because Tony Podesta hangs out of very young children in various states of undress being tortured.
Yeah.
So I think there's a definite distinction there. And I think the fact, again, it's like the timing of this, is the fact that, the Spacey story broke, the Corey Feldman story heats up, but then all of a sudden, Tony Podesta is resigning his chairmanship of the Podesta Group, which is, a very powerful lobbying firm. And, you don't step down from a position like that voluntarily. You do that only under extreme duress. So again, it's all these weird sort of subconscious and subterranean, I don't even know what to call them, and just vibes. I would just say, these weird vibes that you get that I don't think are going to serve Stranger Things as a franchise well. And I forget somebody who was I hearing talking about this. I'm just trying to think. So, somebody who I was listening to on a podcast was saying, he didn't want Stranger Things because he didn't want this town of Hawkins to become like Derry in the Stephen King novels, where things constantly bizarre monsters and things like that are happening. And I really feel, as a work of art, even though it might be incredibly problematic as far as being a limited hangout and whatnot, that the Stranger Things first series is really perfect, and it's really self-contained, and, and it has a nice arc, and it's resolved beautifully. It has all the beats that you want. It's it's an 8-hour 80s movie, and this is just like. You know what this feels like to me? It's funny. Back in the 70s and 80s, a movie would be a hit, and then they do like a shitty TV spinoff of it. And this feels like the shitty TV spinoff, like the old Planet of the Apes TV show or something. I mean, this feels like the shitty TV spinoff of a really good movie, and it's ironic in that sense because it does tie into the whole, the whole vibe of that period.
That's true. There's a meta. There's an accidental, presumably, meta motif of the time period. That's fascinating. Because I know what you mean. And I think it was the mise en scène in series 1 was better. The reality of Joyce's job, what that looked like, the sounds, the way that the school isn't really in it except like the hall, and then they're running around hallways looking for D'Artagnan. Even just the look and feel of the schools and so on. It was a self-contained snapshot of time that was done very well, because period stuff is kind of difficult to do, and it's like to the point where if people haven't, I mean, I hope they've watched Stranger Things 2 if they've gotten this far into the chat, because we have spoiled it. If people haven't seen it, you almost just want to say, which series 1, and don't worry about series 2.
Yeah, a rewatch is definitely in order. But it's interesting that we have to sort of read so much into it to make it more interesting than it actually was. It's kind of, and like both of you guys, I was really looking forward to it. And I was really looking forward to, what information is going to come out next. I mean, are they going to take this whole thing further? Like all these MK Ultra things that they were. Yeah, and then let's be clear, is that MK Ultra was really sort of the centerpiece of the first series, and without that, and it's like Paul Reiser sort of playing the old Harold Gould character. Harold Gould was this actor who always seemed to play kindly doctors on sitcoms and whatnot, and he's doing sort of the Harold Gould character, and it's just like. Paul Reiser, it's just like doesn't work in that role.
To me, right? Like just even the idea that like the big bad of this show, these sinister Department of Energy type guys would put someone like Doc Owens in that kind of position of power, or like is utterly laughable to me. It's kind of like.
Especially as they'd expanded the project. They're
sitting around and can we find the nicest, most friendliest, most humanistic guy that we can to run our evil secret project?
This is why I think they've been left. I think they've been left alone, because Series 2 calls for an even scarier Matthew Modine, because the project is in many ways expanded. You now have like a permanent portal into the Upside Down, and instead you get the Mad About You guy. He was actually quite good. It's just that his character would not have existed. He and Sean Astin were my favorites in it, but he didn't belong there. Like Matthew Modine was the exact right kind of, not terrifying, but menacing. He was exactly because it was trying to say something. And not only is MK Ultra, as Chris said, the centerpiece of Series 1, it's not just that. The centerpiece of Series 1 is what MK Ultra was in fact about, because we're seeing it spoken about like, oh, they're trying to do mind control and, all that kind of stuff. Yes, but Stranger Things was so compelling because the implications of the underground radar research and the experiments on children and all the other kind of psychic programs going on under the broader MK banner were just kind of laid out there, and laid out there in a way that makes them appear as the good guys. And this is why I come back to, until I see otherwise, they were left alone in this series, because that is astounding. Series 1 was an astounding and unprecedented, with the possible exception of the X-Files, just laying out of the jewelry, and Series 2 was a mess.
Well, it's interesting, when Raj says that, that character wouldn't exist, and we wouldn't see this kindly medical doctor in charge of this project. I mean, the whole idea that they wouldn't be trying to weaponize this and schooling all their resources of the entire federal government into harnessing this portal and weaponizing it and opening up in countries that they don't like. I mean, that is just, it's beyond absurdity. As soon as you see this, I kept waiting for the Reiser character to be exposed as evil.
Yeah.
And he never is. I mean, he just gets nicer and better and more helpful. And it's just like, this is absurd. This is a cartoon. This is a Saturday morning cartoon.
I figured they were either going to do that or they were going to reveal Paul Astin's character as like a plant. And I was thinking
that would have been good too.
Yeah, I was thinking because there needs to be a central focus or a villain or something, some kind of symbol as to like, well, why is all of this crazy shit happening? Like, this is horrific when you think about it. So where is the sort of locus point of that horror? Like who's responsible for all this trauma?
Because it absolutely should have been. Now that Series 1, they're trying to to weaponize it, of course. They were trying to get permanent access or reliable access to the Upside Down. In Series 2, they have it, which means Series 2 should have ended with top men. And some sort of... The bad guy is, in fact... whatever the shadow government is, because they're weaponizing the extra-dimensional, and that's just not in there. And I just think that's absurd. It's how did this get past first draft?
Well, it didn't. It was a first draft. I mean, the way the characters interact. I mean, like I said before, the way the characters are just constantly explaining the story that happened last year, and the way they're constantly talking about their feelings and constantly talking about what they're going to do. I mean, it's entirely expository, and you get to the point that it's just like, why am I watching this? Why is nothing actually happening? I mean, there's so much flab in this. There's so many scenes that have no point other than to... hey, remember when this happened? And the way they sort of replay the old riffs, like that whole thing with Will, and then they play that Clash song, and it's just like, are you kidding? That's like something from Buffy. I mean, come on, and this is just absurd.
This did remind me of Buffy. This reminded me of the last series of Buffy, where to make it scarier, they had to have lots and lots of the Uber vamps. From beneath you it devours. Buffy, funnily enough, is contemporaneous for the things that the Duffer Brothers did in fact watch as children. So, it was dreadful. But, okay, because we're going to come to the end, and so we'll do final comments, but I have sort of one question or one topic area to discuss. If, as I currently suspect, and possibly Raj also currently suspects, the kind of one major wink in Series 2 was the almost piece to camera, if you want to tell people about something, or if you want to catch these guys on it, it has to be a lot smaller because no one will believe you.
Water it down.
Yes. Do
water
you
it down.
think that was the Duffer Brothers, because they've been, I assume, left alone with Series 2. Do you think that was the Duffer Brothers' comment on their experience in Series 1?
Raj, you want to take that?
To be honest, I really don't know, and the reason is just because I lost interest. Really, I mean, to dial it back for just one moment. For example, the centerpiece, I guess the sort of centerpiece mystery reveal of season 1 is when Joyce creates a Ouija board in her home, and the whole thing with the lights and the blah 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 blah, which was kind of cool. I was into that scene. I was like, this is interesting. I like the aesthetic of how they did that. And then they just ripped off the whole scene with, okay, so she's turned her house into a Ouija board. Let's turn her house into a map. And I just felt like, what the hell are you doing? It was literally a play-for-play retread of that whole concept. So, the whole thing with the conspiracy guy, was it a way? It's I don't really care if it was or if it wasn't. You just kind of lost me with the, I'm trying to sort of turn my brain over to come up with interesting things to say, but I don't really have many interesting things to say, and that's just the reality of it for me personally.
I kind of agree with Raj in some ways. I mean, I think there are interesting things to say about this, and I think not necessarily embedded in the story itself, but sort of how it exists, and the timing that it came out to me is especially interesting, and just the cultural impact that I don't believe it will have is interesting in regards to the fact that it doesn't tell stories out of school. Here's what I think, Gordon. I think that you're going to discover somewhere down the line, it's like, how everybody discovered that it was like Larry David that was really making Seinfeld work. Yep. And, the season that he didn't produce was just really bad. And then, everybody watched Curb Your Enthusiasm and like, oh, that's what I liked about Seinfeld. I really think that you're going to discover somewhere down the line, and I'm not exactly sure who it is because I think it's a little too early to tell, and it's not quite as prominent as Larry David, but you're going to find out that there's somebody involved in that first season who was not involved in the second season. It may not be somebody who's like an executive producer. It may be somebody a little further down the totem pole, but I think you're going to find that it was not, in fact, the Duffer Brothers, but these other producers a little ways down the line who were feeding this material in. And, maybe they're going to have, inevitably going to have intelligence connections in their family and maybe military background and on and on and on. But I it's kind of like when everybody said, I loved Star Wars and I loved Empire Strikes Back, but the rest of them were just awful, especially the prequels. And that's kind of like, well, that's because Gary Kurtz was central to the success of the first two Star Wars movies. And then he had a falling out with Lucas, and then he wasn't involved in Return of the Jedi, and on and on and on. So it's like I really feel that we're overestimating these guys, and I think that there's another player in the mix that was really responsible for the power.
Absolutely, I think these guys
that's
are
true.
Not very good. We were stuck. Chris and I were talking about it before we hit record, and we've mentioned it a few times. The three of us here, we wanted to get this out quickly because in a couple of weeks no one's going to care, and then it'll be in a month or so's time, or even a year or 2 years time, that, as Chris says, it'll be like, so that's what's changed. And fortunately, if there was any kind of nefariousness behind it, it hasn't worked. But I agree, I think the story has... The thing is, you can leave the Duffer Brothers alone and manage the timing from outside. So if there is a kind of wider... If it fits into a wider project, they're irrelevant to it. They're just not very talented TV makers. That appears to be how it is. We talk about this and go, well, we'll see, and the full story will be revealed in time, I guess.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I go ahead, Raj.
Sorry. I was just saying I agree. I think what Chris said about the Seinfeld analogy is really poignant, because it's the season 2 was exactly like that. It was it lost its kind of sharpness. It lost its kind of narrative tension. It felt terribly indulgent, but not only indulgent, it felt directionless and indulgent. And for a show that had so much goodwill going for it, I think that's unforgivable. Like, as a storyteller, I mean, you don't do shit like that. Like, so yeah.
If I was going to give these guys any credit, I will just say this: you have like your entire life to write your first big breakout hit like this, and you have, I don't know what they have, like maybe 3 or 4 months to write the second series. So I mean, it could be the pressure that they weren't used to the pressure. I mean, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the case, but we'll see what happens. To me, what it really reminds me of, and I don't think that it's having the same recognition yet, but it reminds me of like the second Matrix movie, when everybody was just like, this is horrible. This is like, what happened? And if you look at their career, the Wachowskis' career, I mean, it never really recovered those heights that the Matrix. I mean, they've lost a lot of money for a lot of people. And ironically, the Sense8, which is sort of the grown-up version of this whole idea that we saw in episode 7 of Stranger Things, playing the same kind of theme, is basically how they rehabilitated their creative reputations, but certainly if you look at any metric of their career since the first Matrix film, I mean, it's just straight downhill. So, and I maybe M. Night Shyamalan is also a good example that The Sixth Sense was such a great film, such a perfect film. It just seemed like it was just, it had existed in prehistory and just sort of manifested itself in this way. And his reputation never really recovered from that. So, I mean, there are a lot of examples like this of one-hit wonders, basically. And it could end up being that they really were involved and really were engaged, but they blew their load, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that fans who really, really love season 1 and are still giving it a lot of goodwill, or season 2 a lot of goodwill now, in a very short space of time, like Gordon says, are going to look back and be like, that season didn't age well. My views on it have changed. I think that is what's going to happen.
Well, gentlemen, this was a good chat. This is really fun, actually. And we'll get this up and out so that we can move on with our lives in many respects. But always a pleasure talking to you guys, and some really, really good insights. I think were needed.
It was a pleasure.
I actually hoped to have a lot more to say about this. I was hoping that this would be much more than it was. I was hoping that it would really build on the first series, but it gives me no pleasure to talk about the series like this, but it's just I have to be honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
Well, all right. Well, thank you both for your honesty.
Very good.
You're welcome.